Well, Paul, you tell us, how did you get in on the act in Germany?
Well, it was all through an old agent. We first went there for a fellow who used to manage us, and Mr. Alan Williams of the Jacaranda Club in Liverpool, and he found the engagement, so we sort of went there, and then went under our own steam, as they say, afterwards, you know. And we've just been going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards.
I got a phone call from Paul. It was in the afternoon, and he turned around and said, "Pete, we've had the offer to go to Hamburg. We need a drummer. We've seen you playing drums, and we'd like you to join." So I said, "Yeah, you know, it'd be nice." So he said, "Okay, can you come down and audition?" So we said, "Yeah." So we went down the following day to audition, which was at the Wyvern Club, which is the old Blue Angel. And we played about 5 or 6 numbers. At that time there was John, George, Paul, and Stu Sutcliffe. And towards the end of the interview, Alan Williams came in, but by this time it had already been decided. I was joining the Beatles, and a couple of days after that we were on our way to Hamburg.
We took the chance and we drove over to Hamburg. We stopped at a famous war cemetery in Arnhem, and we had our photograph taken on the cenotaph there. And it's on the cenotaph, it says, "Their names liveth forevermore." And this was the first time the lads had gone to their professional engagement.
We ended up in Hamburg at very late one night. We got the timing wrong. There was no one there to meet us, but we could find Hamburg off the map. But then trying to find St. Pauli, the little district, and Reeperbahn, everyone knew. "Oh, Reeperbahn, yeah, it's this way. You go this way, don't keep it to the house." Okay. So we went down. Well, we found the street and the club, but it was all closed. But we were there with no hotel or anything, and it was now bedtime, yeah. So we managed to shake up someone from a neighbouring club or something. They found the guy, and he opened the club, and we slept the first night in the alcoves on the little red leather seats.
The second night we moved in the Bambikino, and then we were there for ages, like 2 months, 3 months.
I mean, you've got to remember we were, what, 17, 18-year-olds. Went in through the back door of the Bambikino. So, John, I think, was the first to go in, George was the second, and Stu. Followed by Paul and myself, right? Now, those three got the palatial suite. They got the middle room with the electric light bulb, the camp beds, right? Paul and I got the black holes of Calcutta, you know, which would really, I think there must have been concrete bunkers.
And remember Rory Storm and his group coming with Ringo to see us. They arrived a bit later and came and saw the group in residency, came around to see how the groups were living, and they were really shocked because they remembered, like, one of us had a Union Jack over us to keep warm.
The Beatles, and I think anybody who knows the history of the Beatles, if it hadn't been for Hamburg, there would be no Beatles. The work there was so fantastically hard. They would work 7 nights a week. Sometimes they would play at, maybe open up at 7 o'clock, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, they'd still be on stage. And people say to me, "Alan, tell us the secret of how to be a Beatle." I say, go to Germany for 6 months, work 7 nights a week, 8 hours a night, and then come back and ask you the same question.
So, I think the other thing about Hamburg was that it was your first really professional thing, because you actually had to attract people in. I always think that was one of the most important things. We'd be playing, and there'd be hardly anyone in the club, and you'd see a couple of sort of young people, like a young couple, just look in, and they'd first of all look at the price of the beer, and you'd sort of see them go, "No," and they'd go out. So we started to know, God, you know, the beer's too expensive. And so when they ducked in next time, we go, "Well, what I say? Yo, come on, yeah, you know, really, come on in."
John was aggressive, very aggressive, and outrageous on stage. Sometimes when they were in Hamburg, he used to curse the Germans, calling them everything because of the war. So much at one stage that they pulled the show down on them, and they were sacked. This is when they were playing at the Star Club. So he was a very aggressive sort of person. Paul, his personality was, if he hadn't been a rock and roll singer, he would have made a good public relations man. Whenever there was any problems, he was the one who would pour water over the troubled water, what as they explained. He would smooth everything out. And now we come to George. George was the quiet. He was like the baby of the group. I think he was about 16 or 17 years of age when I was their manager. And he had no control over the band. The band was dominated by John and Paul, and George had to go along with it.
Stuart just played in the band because John persuaded him to be in the band. And the first painting Stuart sold, John persuaded him again to buy a bass for that, to be in his group. So actually all Stuart wanted was to become a good painter. John always said when Paul was moaning about, how Stuart didn't practice and all that, but John always said it doesn't matter, he looks good.
I auditioned for Rory, which is interesting because him and later on the Beatles thought the same thing. When I auditioned for Rory, of course, I was still in my black drape and my hair back and how you doing, looking a bit rough, So they were a bit insecure about me, but I auditioned for him, and so I got the job because I was a good player. And then we went to Germany, and that's where I met the Beatles, and that's why it ties up with Rory. We played one club, and they were playing in another club. And we knew him, hello, that's all. We didn't, know him. It was just, oh, hi, from Liverpool, in about hi. So I used to get drunk. And I like sad songs when I'm drunk, That's why I like country, I think. So I'd go into the club. If it ended up that we both played the same club in Germany, the Beatles and Rory. So besides, one night we smashed up the stage between us because it was heavy competition. There'd be a lot of rivalry going on. I'd end up, if they had the last set, I'd be sitting there saying, play so-and-so, which is like this slow songs all the time. So I only found this out later. They were always worried about me because there I am in my black drape again and my hair up, and looking crazy. So they went through the same scene. They're saying, John will tell you that story. God, we didn't know what was happening. I was just sitting there asking for these sad songs. It really looked hard, at the sideboards and that. Because I don't particularly think I've got a hard-looking face, but, they used to be a bit worried about it. So they'd play for me. They'd play me. Yeah, they want a slow song, brother.
The first time I met the Beatles was through my former boyfriend, Klaus Forman, who saw them one night when he was wandering around Hamburg. And then he heard this beautiful sound of rock and roll music, and he went down into a quite dark, filthy cellar where these boys were standing on a very, very tiny stage and performed in such way that he was absolutely, let's call it, knocked out.
The first thing was the music, because I heard it through the window when I was out. Just a cellar window, you look down and you just hear that music. And the second thing was the way they actually acted on stage, which was amazing, just amazing. It's impossible to explain.
I think that's where we found our style. We developed our style because of this fellow he used to say, you've got to make a show for the people. And he used to come up every night shouting, Max Show. So we used to Max Show, and John used to dance around like a gorilla, and we'd all, knock our heads together and things like that.
They were jumping up like crazy, like really making lots of things happen on stage, laughing and screaming. They got a little bit out of control. They had competitions who could drink a whole crate of beer, and who would stand longest on stage before he falls asleep. Pete Best, I think, was falling asleep playing drums once.
The Reeperbahn is not a place where young ladies in the 50s or 60s were to have seen or go there. It was not a nice place to go. But one night I just said, all right, I come with you. And so we went there. And when I went down the stairs and looked at the stage, I was just amazed how beautiful these boys looked. They all had these, I don't know what you call the hairstyle, like the rockers did in the 50s, like Marlon Brando, with a lot of grease. So, and they wore really mad clothes, sort of not very clean, but unusual, like John had a leather jacket on and Stuart had a real proper suit jacket on. They were so individual, every one of them. It was a photographer's dream. In fact, it was my dream. It's very strange, and maybe it sounds sort of sentimental, but when I saw him for the first time, I knew that was my man. You know, he was and still is the love of my life.
Everything else was such a buzz, you know, being right in the middle of the naughtiest city in the world at 17 years old. It was kind of exciting. And learning, you know, about, well, there's all the gangsters, and there's the transvestites, and there's the, you know, it was like that, there's the hookers.
At that time, we were just kids let off the leash, really, come straight from Liverpool to Hamburg. And we were used to these little Liverpool girls, but by the time you got to Hamburg, if you got a girlfriend there, she was likely to be a stripper. It was the only kind of people who were around at the time we were around late at night there. So, I mean, for someone who'd not really had much sex in their lives before, which none of us really had, to be suddenly involved with a sort of hardcore striptease artist who obviously knew a thing or two about sex was quite an eye-opener.
It starts off, you know, you're in Hamburg, you're 18, you've never been abroad in your life, and you've got a bit of money in your pocket, and you go drinking on a Saturday night, you know, and you end up on the Sunday morning and you do a couple of loony things like most 18-year-olds or servicemen abroad. You know, there's always some lunacy. And it just grows, you know. Someone remembers the lunacy and they say, oh, do you remember that? It's the old story, you know. And it grows into this amazing legend about, I remember them, they were tough days. But, you know, it wasn't that much different from now. It was a little bit more lunacy, that's all, you know. Quite a bit more lunacy. But, you know, it was only kind of good, clean fun. Good, dirty fun, actually.
We defected, I mean, if that's I suppose the fun way of putting it, to the top 10 club. We'd had a better offer there. And Tony Sheridan was there, God bless him. And Peter Eklund, the manager of the top 10 club, said, will you play the top 10 club? Contributing factor, better club, going to pay us more money. We said, of course we will, like, you know. Then we went back and told Bruno Koschmieder, who was the manager of the Kaiserkeller, who we were playing. And as soon as we told him, he turned around and said, you know, if you play the top 10 club, you never play Germany again. To which we went, oh, behave yourself, you know, you can't do that to us, we're the Beatles. And then funny things happened, you know, George got sent home for being underage. Paul and I, belongings were still in the back of the Bambikino, so we went back to get our stuff. As we've said for many, many years, there was no lights or electricity where we were staying anyway. We stuck some condoms on the wall, lit fire to them. They spluttered, gave us enough light to throw our bits together. And we came back and we played innocently at the top 10 club, went to bed like you normally did. And the next morning we were woken up by, as we found out later, 2 German policemen, right, who escorted us very unceremoniously down to the Davidstrasse police station. And we got told that we'd been charged with trying to burn the Bambikino down.
When I got back from, when we were deported from Hamburg, first George was deported, and then Paul, and I was the only one old enough to stay there, and I was working with the house band for another month or so after the others had left. This is an old story. Now then finally, I was deported too, and I came home from Hamburg on my own on the train through Holland. It was pretty scary, and I thought, well, I did it, you know. I got home, I didn't call the other Beatles for 3 weeks. And they were mad at me because I hadn't called them. But I was thinking about things, you know.
We played the Casbah the first time we came back from Hamburg. But on December 26th, we played here, Litherland Town Hall. Now we'd been billed as the Beatles direct from Hamburg. We're announced as the Beatles direct from Hamburg. Right? And all of a sudden we're into our first number. Fans go wild. Okay, no one has ever seen anything like it in Liverpool for quite some time. And they actually think that we're German. Okay, till when we start to make the announcement, you know, we suddenly realise that we're not from Germany, we're from Liverpool. You know, here they are, 5 Scouse lads, talking Scouse, billed as the Beatles direct from Hamburg.
The music started, and the whole dance floor just moved basically down to the front of the stage and just stood there, mesmerised, you know. And then all of a sudden there was just like these screams from the girls in the audience, you know. A couple of fellas as well, but mostly girls.
So the second time we went back, when I was 18, that's when we were backing up Tony Sheridan. And at that point, this fella came into the club who was, they said, oh, he's this famous record producer and musician. He was called Bert Kempfert. And his claim to fame was he had a #1 hit in America. Not only was he a record producer, but he had a hit in America called Wonderland by Night. It was a kind of turned out to be a trumpet sort of solo. But he came in the club, and remember, this buzz went around, we've got to be good, play really good, we may get a chance to record, which we did. I think he came back 2 times, and then he said, oh, I want you to come in the studio with Sheridan and record, and we got all pleased with ourselves. And then we got to the studio, and he just wanted us to, like, back up Sheridan.
I had never been outside Britain before, but now I was going to Hamburg with Dot Roan, Paul's girlfriend, and we were so excited and scared that neither of us could sleep the night before we set off. On the platform we looked around. No one was there. It was an extremely long platform, and after a while we saw John and Paul running toward us. As they got closer, we saw that they looked even worse than we did. Exhausted and baggy-eyed, they reeked of alcohol, and their clothes looked as though they hadn't been washed for a week. The boys played every night until 2 and kept going on pep pills.
Preludin. 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 Preludin.
Well, there is Paul, who's downstairs in the basement with a toilet woman, and he's buying off her pepper pills, like, you know, Purple Hearts, those sort of things. And they played all night, and even the bosses came up and said, hey, why don't you take some of those, and you feel much better, you feel happy, come on.
Stuart was a very special person, and he was miles ahead of everybody, you know, as far as intelligent and artistic feelings are concerned. He was miles ahead.
Stuart just stayed there because he decided to get Rye-hearted with Astrid.
In those days, of course, all we wanted to do was make a record. Any record. Just go in the studio and make a record. And we made a record. We made a single with the Beatles called My Bonnie. My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. We discovered that you can make something original and authentic out of an old song by doing your own thing and putting your own energy into it, your own creativity, and being innovative at the same time. And that, of course, you don't get bored that way after playing 8 hours a night for months on end. So the music that sort of came out of all this was sort of going back to Britain and putting out some feelers and getting some roots. And the whole English music scene changed because of what was going on here. Because lots of musicians from England came through this school. It's like a school, a music school, really. And they learned to play all night, and they learned to polish it up and become authentic and to become real all of a sudden, and went back to Britain and knocked everybody out by doing what they'd learned here. And from that, sort of the British Revolution, the British music thing took off, and part of that were, of course, the Beatles.
When they finished playing in Hamburg, they went back to Liverpool, and I visited Stuart there. And then George came up to me and said, could you please cut my hair like Stuart's? So I did that, but the other two didn't want to know about it, John and Paul. And Pete couldn't have the hairstyle anyway because he had curly hair. So George had beautiful hair, and it went absolutely great when I cut it for him, and he was all pleased. But a little bit later, John and Paul went to visit an old friend of ours, another German photographer called Jürgen Vollmer. He used to live in Paris and was assistant to William Klein, a very famous photographer. And Paul and John visited Jürgen, and he persuaded them to have their hairstyle changed. And so they came back from Paris looking like the rest of the Beatles.
I started whilst I was in charge of the records division of a family concern of which I was and am, as it happens, still a director. We were asked, or I was asked, by a young boy for a record by a group by the Beatles, and it always had been our policy in records to look after whatever request was made. And I followed up this inquiry. I didn't know anything about it, and it was only after a week or two that he told me that they were, in fact, a Liverpool group. I assumed, for some reason, that they were from Germany. Anyway, he told me that they were a Liverpool group, and that they'd just, in fact, returned from Germany, and that they were playing in a club called the Cavern, about 100 yards away from my office, and I arranged to go down there, and I saw them one midday session, which is a pretty, and at the time it was a pretty much of an eye-opener to go down into this darkened, dank, smoky cellar in the middle of the day, and to see crowds and crowds of kids watching these four young men on stage. They were sort of rather scruffily dressed in the nicest possible way, or I should say in the most attractive way. Black leather jackets and jeans, long hair, of course, and rather untidy stage presentation, not terribly aware and not caring very much what they looked like. I think they cared more even then what they sounded like. I think they still care more what they sound like. Obviously they know the importance now. I commenced to go around with them almost a week or so after having first met them, and then we worked out a basis for an agreement which they didn't actually sign, and I didn't actually start to take anything out of their money, of which there was very little in any case, until about 4 months afterwards. Actually, the first meeting that we had, the first business meeting we held at my store. It got off to a very late start. It was quite amusing, really. 3 of the boys arrived at the appointed time at 4 o'clock. I was very busy ordering records for Christmas, and Paul didn't show at all for at least 3/4 of an hour, and I was a bit put out about this. I thought this is the first meeting, they want to do something about management and so on. And I asked one of the boys to get on the phone to him, and he came back and he said, well, he's just got up, he's in the bath. So I sort of, shouted about a bit, and I thought, this is very disgraceful indeed, and how can he be so late for an important thing? And George just simply replied, it was very typical of them, well, he may be late, but he's very clean.
Then when we got back to Liverpool, I was just in bed one afternoon, because we were up all night, like we are now, and sleep all day. Brian Epstein came up, he says, will you sit in with the Beatles, Pete isn't well, Pete Best. Yeah, so I said, yeah, okay. So I got up and he had his big car, drove me down there. And I played that afternoon, and then they had a show at Southport that evening, so we played the afternoon session. We went to this Crocodile Club, something like that it was called. Stayed there all afternoon getting crazy. Well, mainly just drinking those days. And then we drove off to Southport and did the show, and it was very nice. There's your money, but we got to know each other a bit, because when you're playing, it's different getting to know people from getting to know shaking hands and sitting with them. So then every time Pete saw I wasn't well, I can't say too much, he in those days he used to sue me when I said he was sick. I'd sit in, and then gradually we formed this friendship, and then I was away. I mean, we talked about me joining vaguely, but it was like, well, would you like to? Yeah, I'd like to. They were the only band I'd go and watch, in Liverpool. In fact, we all used to play the same place, though. There's 4 bands on the bill. They were on the bill, I was on the bill, with my band, someone else, but I'd just go and watch them, because they were the best band in Liverpool. I'd love to get them, and I played with them, and it was always great to play with them, So I'd love to get in this band. So we would, sit in some club somewhere, talk about it. I say, well, if we get it together, I'd love it,
I found out about Stu's death. We were going over to actually open the Star Club. Those that had engaged us to open the Star Club. This was the first time we'd flown over, and we were expecting Stu and Astrid to meet us at the airport. And when we got off the plane, we saw Astrid there. You always expected Stu to be with her. They were never separate or anything like that. And we just sort of turned around and said, hey Astrid, where's Stu? And she turned around and said, she didn't sort of, keep it back or anything. She just turned around and said that Stu had died a couple of days before we actually got into Hamburg. It upset us in as much as that, okay, we all had a lot of respect for the guy, regardless of the fact that he left the band and gone back to, working in Hamburg. And it was most probably the first time that I saw John, and I think this indicates the total admiration that John had for Stu as a person and as a friend, actually physically break down and cry in front of someone. It was a scene which was very upsetting. That's the only way I can put it. I mean, I don't want to dwell on the, try and describe the scene or, the sympathy which was going on, but it upset John tremendously, and Paul and I were also deeply upset by, the tragedy which had befallen Stuart.
From Stuart's letters, John knew that he'd been suffering from increasingly bad headaches. He developed such a severe headache that Astrid's mother had phoned her at work to say she was calling an ambulance. Astrid had raced home just in time to go with Stuart to the hospital, but he died in her arms at 4:45 p.m. in the back of the ambulance. The cause of death was later given as cerebral hemorrhage, and Stuart had been 22. During the next few weeks in Hamburg, John's behaviour was wild and unpredictable, also no doubt a symptom of grief. He saw Astrid eventually and comforted her in his own blunt way. He told her she must choose to live, not die, and made her come to the club to watch them play.
We got liquored up this night, and we all decided we were going to go on stage, do what we wanted to do. So George peels off, he gets down to a bathing costume, a pair of Wellingtons, nothing else on, goes on stage. Paul gets dressed up in a girl's frock and a hat, something like this, goes on stage. But John Topsy used to be a broken up old toilet seat in the back. So John, couldn't live it down. Just the toilet seat, puts it round his head, strips down to his underpants, nothing else on. So when these apparitions walk out, the crowd goes berserk, they never seen anything like it. And we get up on stage, and it gets to one of John's numbers. I think it was either something like Sweet Little 16 or something like this. It's a good blendy rock number. So, middle of this number, John deadpan as usual, turns round, turns it back to the audience, and just drops his underpants. Okay? And you can just imagine it, there's two big rosy cheeks, sort of looking at the German audiences,
I mean, let's be quite honest. You look at the guys, 18-year-olds in Germany, okay, middle of Sin City, St. Pauli, hardest, vice centre of the world. We get there, we take the German audience by storm. Girls were falling over themselves to go to bed with us. We're not going to refuse that, are we? We spent 2 years of our lives together in Hamburg, living out of one another's pockets, sharing the same girlfriends.
We're later in Hamburg with June Vincent and Little Richard, and there's still many a story going around about the escapades, especially with Jean.
He thought his girlfriend was cheating on him, so he asked us to go back to the hotel with him. And he's knocking on the door. Yeah, Margie? We're going, you're going to have to talk a bit louder, Jean, because he's got this little voice, And he's knocking on the door. He's going, Margie, you in there? I said, knock louder. He goes, Margie? He says, she's in there, She's in there with a man. Well, then she finally comes to the door. She's got a roller thing. She's not in there with anyone. He's just making it up. And he comes in, he's filming, he's talking. He's telling paranoia. Early paranoia. He goes to his little bedside table, he pulls out a pistol. Yeah. We're going, see you, Jean.
Brian then had this tape which he hawked around. And I think it was somebody in the HMV shop on Oxford Street knew George Martin and told Brian to go and play the tape to George Martin, and then he gave us the audition at Abbey Road.
I decided that Pete wasn't a very good drummer and wasn't going to make my life very easy in making good records. So I went to Brian and I said, look, I appreciate the problem that I'm going to give you, but there's no reason why, to the public, Pete Best shouldn't be part of the group, but as far as records are concerned, he's out.
Yeah. And over in the background here, and also in the background of the group, but making a lot of noise, is Ringo Starr.
Hello.
You're new to the group, aren't you, Ringo?
Yes, 9 weeks now.
Mm-hmm. Were you in on the act when the recording was made of Lovely
Yes,
June?
I'm on the record.
on that disc.
I am.
It's down on record, you know. Now,
I'm the drummer.
what's that offensive weapon you've got there? Those are your
Well,
drumsticks.
it's just a pair of sticks a fan have just bought me, you know, because we're going away, and they put my name on.
Yeah.
And it's good, you know.
Well, you say you're going away. That leads us on to another question now. Where are you going?
Germany, Hamburg.
When I first went to Liverpool, Brian Epstein's daddy owned a lot of record stores, and he brought me to the ballroom there. And when I walked in, he said, "Richard, I got 4 guys. Would you mind taking a picture with my group?" I went on the stage, and they were so excited, they just wanted to touch me. I took them with me to Hamburg, Germany, to the Star Club, where they went on right before me. They sound good. Paul was unbelievable. To me, I felt that he could make it. The Beatles had a little name in Hamburg. We went there, and we would sit in the dressing room between shows, me and Paul, John, and they would listen to me, and they liked it that, woo! They wanted that so bad, you know, and Paul could do it, you know, and he would just get, you know, he couldn't do it as good. He could do it, but not the way he wanted it to be. I think that they grew very rapidly because what they did was, I think the Beatles themselves were surprised with the phenomenal success that happened to them. I'm sure they were shocked because they went back and got the old music. And they just, what they did, they brought it back to the public. Instead of coming out of America, they brought it from Europe and threw it back across the water. So now, here it is, it's good.
Kansas City, go George.
In Liverpool, Hamburg, and around the dance halls, you know, and what we generated was fantastic when we played straight rock. And there was nobody to touch us in Britain, you know.